Hello ladies and gentlemen, Deja Vu here bringing you set 2 from CJ Entis vs SK Telecom 1 for this new year 2012. We had quite a treat there in the last game, Best taking down Hydra in what I think was a really well played game. Very entertaining as well. And we're going to go on to set 2, which now we're going to have a mirror matchup. It's going to be a TVT Fantasy versus Skyhigh. Skyhigh in the top right in purple. Well, I guess he's not purple anymore, but I'm sorry, Skyhigh in the bottom left in yellow. My bad. Skyhigh in the bottom left in yellow again. I wonder if they're doing this on purpose, just because ally, you know, you can do ally colors when they do that tab color to make them all yellow-red. And they know CJ Entis wears yellow coats, so they're gonna make them yellow for the entire series, which would actually be pretty awesome. I think that's a great idea. If CJ's gonna wear yellow coats, you might as well make them yellow for the entire series. It makes it really easy to identify. And SK wears orange, so make them red. It's, you know, pretty simple to figure that one out, and really make it much easier for us to watch if we don't catch that, you know, that screen at the beginning and identifying the players. And we don't understand Korean to understand who's who. But this is going to be Skyhigh and Fantasy. You know, 2 years ago, this would have been one of the most hyped matchups. Skyhigh versus Fantasy. They've had many a battle. It used to be that trifecta, Skyhigh, Fantasy, and Flash. They just played in TVTs. Every single one would, of course, go an hour and a half to 2 hours, exaggerating. But they would just go forever, and they would just be these most epic of epic battles. And they were the top 3 TVTers for a long stretch of time, and it was great to watch. I mean, I would honestly say TVT was actually kind of fun watching those 3. I mean, I know it sounds kind of weird, but they actually made it pretty entertaining. They were just so good at it that it was actually pretty entertaining to watch. And hopefully, maybe Skyhigh, despite how much he's tailed off in recent times, maybe he can bring some of that magic back, and we can have a very epic game once more. It's been a while since I've seen Skyhigh give us a quality epic game. He's had some longer games, but I don't think they've really been the best played recently. They've just happened to go for a while. But if he can really put it together again, I would love to see Skyhigh have a really good game. We did see Fantasy lose recently on this map, Jade to Last, unable to deal with that was just a shocker. I have no idea how Last beat Fantasy. You would not expect to see that. I mean, Last is a really good TVTer, but Fantasy is one of the best as well. And I really thought that he would have been able to win that, but STX actually STX is Last able to take that victory, which was really cool. We do have a 1-Rax Expo coming in here from Skyhigh, so going to go for that really early Expo timing and try and take an early lead there. And on the other side, we've got the factory coming out from Fantasy, so it's not going to be very early at all of an Expo for Fantasy. Certainly not a build order victory by any stretch of the beans for either player. Just 2 different avenues to get there to open your game, and of course this means that Fantasy is going to have to be the aggressor in the early game in order to maintain his position. Now we'll see whether this is going to be Wraiths or if it's just going to be straight up factory play. We do see a lot of Wraith play, 1-port and 2-port Wraith in TVT. Definitely a strong possibility here, and Fantasy now getting into the base and seeing Skyhigh's build and using his SCV to try and kill this Marine, which is absolutely hilarious because I'm 95% certain that as long as you right click really quickly, your SCV will kill that Marine, which is absolutely hilarious as that SCV chases that Marine around in a circle. That was awesome. And yeah, well, we do have an SCV from Skyhigh inside of Fantasy's base as well, and Fantasy is just going to throw it on the command center, so he's just going to take the tech advantage, but the later eco, since he does have that factory out, he's going to have that vulture out a little bit earlier, so he's going to just kind of see the economic advantage for the tech and military advantage here in the early parts, or in the later parts of the early game, I guess it would be. And he is going to force Skyhigh to put down a bunker. So Skyhigh on top of things here, putting down that bunker, not going to try and fight without that bunker. You do see that sometimes. Actually, you do see that a lot, where Terran players will think, okay, well, I can just bide time with my Marines and SCVs and just get a factory and get my vultures out, and I'll be okay. And at cross positions, they might actually even be able to. He might have even been able to get away with it, but I think it's a little dangerous. And Skyhigh playing a little bit safer here, going to throw down that bunker, which I think is the proper decision here. He knows that he's got that earlier base, might as well just invest some of that into defending his new property. That's exactly what he's done, and he's going to be able to hold against any sort of early vulture harassment here. We do have a starport coming in here from Skyhigh as well, so we could be seeing some drop or raids. We'll have to watch for that, see how that develops. And remember, tech is so important in TVT. So you see the starport, there's a possibility for raids and dropship play, but also to get to the armory and the science facility that will get you that +2 weapons upgrade. That is so important in TVT, that +2 weapons upgrade that allows tanks to blow each other up in 2 shots instead of 3. Very important, and can really change the tide of a game. Especially, you do see it occasionally. You don't see it a lot, but occasionally you will see it where one Terran player will get, what the heck is that? That SCV got glitched out. Oh, that sucks. Oh man, poor guy. Oh, poor Skyhigh. He just can't catch a break, can he? Oh, poor Skyhigh. Well, he just lost an SCV to an Uber glitch, and poor guy. I feel bad for him, but you know, what you gonna do? There's the Skyhigh face of, well, what you gonna do? What the? And he, oh my god, Skyhigh! Ugh, is he high? What is he doing? Lifting off that command center in order to build his comsat station, and, whew, got some bad things going here for Skyhigh. Some little errors. Of course, none of them are game changing, game breaking, but you know, just those little errors can build up, and it's kind of, you know, just disappointing. Kind of disappointing to see. We do have the armory and the academy coming up now for Fantasy as well, so he will have his comsat stations a little bit later, but his armory, it looks like, will be a little bit earlier. We'll see if that ends up being an important factor in this game. And as both players just seem content to mech her up here. We do have a Wraith out here for Skyhigh already, wandering around the map, gonna try and see if he can catch anything to break. And Skyhigh just goes ahead and blows up that SCV because it's not doing anything. It doesn't even really. He gives them maybe a millionth of a second better scouting time in that direction anyway, so really not serving any purpose at all. But here comes the Wraith scouting in here, and this is really nice because he's going to get a nice count on factory count, on starport count, on machine shop count, on SCV count. So that Wraith, even though it's not doing much damage at all, the scout that he gets off there is really nice. Now, normally Terran players would just use their scans and be able to get most of that same information, but he's able to save those scans and use those scans for mines if he wants, and almost loses that tank to a mine, but able to just barely pick it off in time. And you know, he's using those scans now in order to clear some of these mines out, and able to do a good job with that. So Skyhigh with that Wraith, I actually like that Wraith. Even though it's not really doing much of anything, I like the fact that it's scouting out, looking for hidden bases, looking for hidden starports, anything like that, as he just continues to macro up. And he's just putting down 2 more factories for Skyhigh, so he'll be rocking that out pretty good. With his macro, he will be in good shape. And on the other side for Fantasy, I still believe we have 2 more factories coming for him as well, so we're going to have 4 fac on 4 fac. Still very close in everything. And never mind, we're going to have 6 factories from Skyhigh, so I guess his eco is getting really strong here, and you can watch at the bottom right hand corner of the screen, Skyhigh on the left, Fantasy on the right is how they're going to correspond. And you'll be able to watch their minerals and gas growth and expenditures as it develops. And yeah, this Wraith just being a nuisance, continuing to get some really good scouting information. I really like this from Skyhigh again. I mean, honestly, if Fantasy doesn't want to put up any turrets, he doesn't even have an engineering bay, he can just put that Wraith on patrol back and forth over Fantasy base and continuously get really good scouting information. That's just one of those things that would be really good for him. And Skyhigh looks like he's trying to push out, going to try and take the middle of the map and try to start the split here. And he is getting in here with his tanks and placing down some mines as well to try and take down Fantasy's tanks, and he's not going to be able to pick off any of them as Fantasy was able to blow up all of the vultures and all of the mines before any true damage happened here. And it looks like Fantasy is going to be able to help split the map as well. So both players are going to start splitting the map. This position is going to be advantage Fantasy at this moment. It's just a little bit more closer to Skyhigh's base, and it will be a little bit harder for Skyhigh to get out and get to the top left or to the bottom right. Of course, Skyhigh can go to the 6 o'clock position, but it's going to be a little bit harder for him to get through the middle of the map into the other 2 mains in the top left and bottom right. And it will be, obviously, by definition, it'd be a little bit easier for Fantasy to get to those positions. We do have a bunch of vultures here from Skyhigh pushing up, mining up a couple of spots, and Fantasy going to the same spot to mine it up. That is hilarious. Apparently that is a really important spot to mine up in TVT. As Skyhigh comes in here with all of his vultures, is he going to go for a run by here? And he could actually pick off a ton of SCVs. Fantasy's got like nothing in his base, and he's placing mines, and he's going to start picking off SCVs, so this could be really, really bad for Fantasy if Skyhigh is able to focus down the SCVs. It looks like he's only been able to take down a few of them, though. Able to place down mines, but Fantasy coming back with all of his vultures, and he is going to be able to clean this up. So this could have been very, very bad for Fantasy, but Fantasy able to bring his vultures back very, very quickly and fend that off rather efficiently. I gotta say, that was really well defended by Fantasy, and he's able to clear away all of those mines before any of his tanks come into play. So I really like that. That was a really expert defense there by Fantasy, able to stop any sort of critical damage, any critical blows being dealt. And Skyhigh coming in here with his dropship, and it was scouted out by Fantasy's mines if he noticed it, and I'm not sure that he did, because there doesn't seem to be any sort of response from Fantasy in order to deal with this drop coming his way. So we're gonna have two vultures and a wraith at the natural expansion. We're gonna have two more vultures dropped off into the main. So this is just going to be more harassment, more annoyance that Fantasy is going to have to deal with. And I think I honestly think that he should have been able to see this. I think he should have been able to see this and stop any of this from happening. Unfortunately, just wasn't paying attention to the mines, and Skyhigh needs to back that Wraith out before that missile turret completes, and he's going to be able to do so. And those vultures in the back of the main continuing to do damage, getting more and more SCV kills. So Skyhigh with this harassment is starting to do enough damage that it's starting to take its toll, and you can see there in the bottom right hand corner, you can see the side count as Skyhigh is starting to pull away. He's up about 35 supply, which is quite a bit, especially in mirror matchups. 35 supply is a lot. 35 supply is essentially about 15 tanks. Yep. Although now it's evened up a little bit somehow. Wasn't really paying. Yeah. Apparently it's evened up by about another 15 side. But yeah, 30 supply is going to be about 15 tanks. So just something to watch out for as you see that. It really is a huge difference. As we have some more vulture on vulture battles, and it looks like Fantasy is going to win these ones as well. Again, Fantasy able to win a lot of these vulture battles, which is really good for him. And he's got that 12 o'clock position going. Does he have any SCVs there for these vultures to pick off? Yes, there is a lot of SCVs there, and Fantasy is just going to run his SCVs away, not even going to bother to try and fight. Doesn't have enough units in the area in order to defend that quite yet. Does send a Goliath up there, and that should be enough for now. And this has got to be like the weakest front line I've seen in a long time in TVT. Normally you see the big line of tanks facing off once against each other, and then you see all these little skirmishes, but it almost feels like the skirmishes are bigger than these tank lines. And here comes Skyhigh, maybe seeing the weakness here in Fantasy's tank line, going to try and take it down, and does take down some of the tanks, not all of them certainly, and Fantasy going to respond by bringing in some more of his tanks to reestablish this position, and that mine almost doing a ton of damage. But Fantasy still trying to maintain this high ground. Fantasy, if he can maintain this high ground, can really keep the pressure on Skyhigh, despite having absorbed all that harassment. He would be in pretty good position strategically, tactically, positionally, in order to maintain the pressure. It looks like Skyhigh is starting to build up a Wraith count, as is Fantasy. Both players deciding to build up Wraith forces here in the middle stages of this game. And here comes Skyhigh again for some more harassment. Not going to be able to do much of anything. And this Vulture is going to go down to one more siege tank shot. But what have we got going on here? It's still 3 base on 3 base. Surprising for a lot of people who this is not one of those styles of TVT that we kind of have that no rush 25 that you sometimes see, where you just take 6 bases and let your opponent take 6 bases and then you start duking out. This has definitely been much more action packed for most of the game, and Skyhigh coming here with his Wraith, losing some to the Scan and the Goliaths, but able to pick off a couple of tanks as well, and trying to bring in his own tanks to clear things up, but not quite able to do so, and he might lose another Wraith. Very, very close, just barely able to maintain his Wraiths. But Fantasy does know about those Wraiths now, and he is going to start putting up missile turrets at the front, as we can see there. As we continue to get upgrades rolling and some scans coming in here to blow up some more mines. You can't even tell whose mines are who. Needless to say, though, that there are a bunch of mines. There are more vultures here for Skyhigh, so Fantasy would be wise to back up. We are starting to get a very large defensive position here for Fantasy, where he's trying to just take control of the middle of the map with this huge tank line, and Skyhigh is starting to stretch Fantasy out a little bit. With these tanks coming across the bottom of the map, he's going to be able to start stretching Fantasy's defensive line a little bit. Now once he does that, if Skyhigh can get a big group of forces and then push one of these one location, he might be able to bust this out. And it looks like that's exactly what he's going to try and do here. Coming in with the Vultures, going to try and mine the place up, bringing in tanks in support as well to try and finish this off and see if he can bust out. He does not want to be contained any longer. All of the Vultures do go down for both players, but there are more coming in here for Skyhigh, and I think he might be able to break at least this side of the contained. Very, very close. We do see a lot more tanks for Skyhigh than for Fantasy, and Fantasy may be forced to retreat and back up here. He does not want to give this up. Bring in a couple more tanks to just try and maintain the line as much as he can. Wraiths being revealed here for Fantasy, and he is going to be able to pick off one tank before he retreats, fearing the opposing Wraiths that Skyhigh has available. So as it stands, Fantasy does manage to maintain his middle high ground against Skyhigh, and the longer he's able to maintain that, of course, the greater that is for him, and the more map control that is for him, and the more opportunity he has, if at any given point he wishes to go and take a fourth base. He hasn't really even moved towards doing that yet, but I expect to see one or both players start going for a fourth base very, very shortly, in the next minute or so. Kind of surprising in a TVT that's gone this long without. And here comes Skyhigh again, just completely sick of being contained. Picking off one tank on the high ground, and then starting to maneuver his forces around. Now we've had those forces at the 6 o'clock position, kind of maneuvering counterclockwise around Fantasy defensive position. Now we're seeing Fantasy start to move clockwise around, or Skyhigh move clockwise around Fantasy's position, and I like this tactically. Skyhigh is a good player. He's a good tactical player, and I think this is a good idea. Just continuing to try and pressure Fantasy and his defensive posture at all locations, and just probe and probe and probe. See if you can find a weak spot after you stretch Fantasy thin, and try and bust out. And that's what he's done so far. I think and the other thing is that with that middle fight there, where we saw Skyhigh, I think still winning that fight. A lot of players in Skyhigh's position would have just pushed out there and just tried to push with his tanks and see what he could do. Skyhigh there pulling back, I think, was actually pretty wise. He might have lost all those tanks and just playing a little bit more conservative style and keeping his tank count up, so that later on he'll be able to use those tanks for his true bust out, which is coming. I'm just feeling the Skyhigh break coming. Like I honestly, I'm just feeling it. It's going to come sooner or later, and it's going to be all out. And is this it? This might be it. Fantasy busting out with a ton of tanks, not even resieging, unsieging his entire force, and breaking through. And he is going to bust this line straight open. Fantasy just does not have the tank count in order to deal with this. It looks like at least he shouldn't. He just needs to kill that one tank. Come on, Skyhigh, focus your freaking tanks, and just needs to finish that off. And he does manage to bust out here, at least somewhat. At least he's able to get Fantasy off the edge of that high ground and start to get his own position on that embankment. And now Skyhigh needs to try and not only maintain this position, but also watch out for a Vulture harass at his fourth base. We did see that in the top right. That third of the top right needs to be very, very careful. That is a very vulnerable position right now for Skyhigh. And I can see Fantasy in his hyper-aggressive style could see him just sending 6 Vultures over to that spot and seeing if they can do some damage. I'm not sure if what Fantasy or what Skyhigh has there to defend. I hope he has that well defended. But right now, Skyhigh with that fourth base nice and operational. Now with the bust out, gotta think things are looking pretty good here right now for Skyhigh. Fantasy looks like he's taking his fourth base at the bottom right third, and that will be where he will get his fourth base and probably try and take the other bases there as well. He might have been taking the main as well. Can't really decipher that red blob in terms of its size to tell for sure if that's a command center or not. But this is a very, very nice TVT, I gotta say, shaping up here for as it doesn't look like it's going to end anytime soon. So if you guys are thinking that this is going to, if you don't have a lot of time, I have a feeling this game is going to go for a while. This has one of those, the aura of a very, very long game developing between Skyhigh and Fantasy, perhaps another one of their epic games that we've seen in the past. And so far, Skyhigh has definitely made more mistakes, I would say, just little errors, but his I think tactically he's been playing very, very well, and that's really enabled him to get, in my opinion, a little bit of a lead in this game. Certainly nothing that Fantasy cannot overcome, but a little bit of a lead in this game with that bust out. I think he blew up a lot more stuff than he lost, and he's able to get his fourth up a little bit earlier, so he's in a little stronger position that way. He's got to watch out for Fantasy's growing air force, and his counter to that is to get all these Goliaths. Now, we have seen that, there was a time when it was just a lot of air versus air battles that we saw going on in TVT, and now we're kind of starting to see the trend back towards air versus ground, where you see a lot of Goliaths starting to show up again, and ceding the maneuverability advantage to their air opponent, but taking the sturdier Goliaths as opposed to the Vultures, which is kind of funny to say, to call a Goliath sturdy. So we do have Vultures attacking Skyhigh's fourth, and to counter that, Skyhigh is going to take the opportunity to attack where the Vultures aren't, and that's the tank line, and is going to wreck the middle of Fantasy's tank line in the middle of the map. So Fantasy with those, this is exactly what you do in TVT. If your opponent attacks with Vultures at one of your bases, and you're not going to be, and you know you're not going to be able to get there in time in order to really defend it, you attack where the Vultures aren't. You attack the tanks. That's what the Vultures are there for. Vultures are there to harass, lay mines, and to just stop units from getting too close to the tanks. That's their purpose. And when you use a lot of your Vultures to do harassment, you can sometimes get into a position where you don't have enough to defend yourself, to defend your tanks, and I think that's exactly what we saw there. And Skyhigh able to take just another little inch, just a couple more inches of ground, and just trying to push out and just getting a little bit more of the map, and just trying to take a little bit higher portion. And that's exactly what he's doing here, continuing to push out, and Fantasy just has units all over the place, a few here, a few there, and Sky taking advantage of the fact, picking off a few units up here, a few units there. So it looks like I really think that Sky has got a good strategy in this game, and still maintaining the pressure, still maintaining pressure on all of Fantasy's lines. It's it's interesting to watch how much both players are really pressuring each other. But I do think Skyhigh's got a good strategy going in here, and Fantasy coming in here with his Air Force is going to try and take down this fourth base with just his Air Force. There is a Goliath there to support Skyhigh's rates, and Skyhigh is going to counter by pushing again, by attacking where the rates aren't, and he's going to try and take down some more tanks, and he's going to be successful. And now Fantasy's fourth and fifth are at risk right now. Skyhigh could go all out and just start pushing at the fourth and the fifth and see how much damage they can do. Fantasy is going to have to react, cannot afford to lose both of these bases, but I'm not sure if he has the forces in order to really fight this. We see Vultures going towards the fourth. It does look like Fantasy's rates are wreaking havoc at Skyhigh's fourth as well. There were no turrets there. Tanks coming in support as well, so that without the tank, without the turrets, those rates are going to be able to take down that command center very, very quickly. And now we're just seeing a little bit of a base trade here going on. Skyhigh is bringing in his forces to try and defend this command center. They are not going to be able to do so. That command center is going to go down. I am sure of it. And there it goes. That command center does blow up. Skyhigh loses his fourth, has no fifth prepared. On the other side, Fantasy is going to lose a lot of SCVs. He has lost a ton of them, but is he going to lose the buildings? Will he lose the command centers? And this, I think, is going to end up swinging towards Fantasy's favor, because Skyhigh doesn't have a real good way of killing off these command centers, particularly the fourth. Of course, the fifth could die to the Goliaths with they have enough damage that they could potentially take down that command center, but these rates are going to stop these tanks from really getting in there to blow up any of the command centers. Now that Fantasy's won the air battle, and Fantasy, I think, his side count is 20 counts lower, but I think Fantasy, in my opinion, Fantasy definitely comes out of this battle ahead, because he's able to keep that command center alive. Skyhigh has no fourth base right now. He has nowhere he has to go build another command center. Mains are mined out, naturals are mined out, thirds are actually getting pretty close to mined out. I gotta think at this point they've got to be about halfway depleted, so you really need those fourth, fifth, sixth bases at this point of the game in order to really maintain your force. And you can see that in the mineral gas count. Neither player really able to neither player with huge stockpiles right now. So it looks like Skyhigh is going to pick off the fifth from Fantasy, but Fantasy is going to maintain his fourth, and I don't foresee that fourth falling very easily. I really think that Fantasy at this point knows that he has the advantage economically, and if not militarily, which he does not militarily, but he's going to try and maintain that and try and take that fourth base. And he is sneaking a fifth base there top left, and he may actually be successful in doing that as well. So these little victories, these little bases that Fantasy's putting up may end up swinging the game back into his favor as it develops. But Skyhigh certainly in a good position as well. If he's able to maintain these tanks in the bottom right, he could actually stop this fourth base from ever mining again, which would be obviously effectively taking the base out of the game. We do have some Vulture on Vulture battles going on here. Wraith coming in here to really swing the tide back towards Fantasy. And where will we go from here? Where will Fantasy's Wraiths go? Trying to keep track of them. Looks like they're going back towards the middle of the map, trying to find some more tanks that they can possibly pick off. Skyhigh busting out of the bottom right, going to try and just take that base at the bottom right natural and see what he can do there and develop his game. This is really interesting. Both players have bases in both corners, so both players want to maintain both corners. Both players want to put aggression on both corners, and who will be able to do it a little bit better? Skyhigh pushing in here in the top left, going to take down the forces that Fantasy has available, and if Skyhigh pushes down into the main, he will be able to take down that base. I don't think Fantasy really has the forces in order to get there, in order to stop this. This is a pretty powerful force from Skyhigh, and it does look like Fantasy is not going to be able to get there in time. He could possibly try and get in there with the Wraiths, but there's enough Goliaths that it would be unlikely to be very good for him. And now it looks like Skyhigh is going to have an opportunity to kill off a ton of SCVs. That is a huge SCV blob there that we see from Fantasy. That looks like almost 2 bases worth of SCVs. Wraiths coming in here to the bottom right are going to try and pick off all of the Goliaths. There are one Goliath left, and then they'll be able to start picking up tanks. Skyhigh seeing this, trying to bring his forces back into position with his tanks and bringing in some more Goliaths as Fantasy moves into position with a much larger force of tanks. So Skyhigh with his forces now split 50-50 essentially in the bottom right and the top left. Fantasy, it looks like, has basically focused his forces here at the bottom right, sacked this top left where he's lost, I don't even know, 20 SCVs maybe here at the top left. Basically 2 bases worth of SCVs have gone down there at the top left. Nothing really Fantasy can do about it, but Fantasy is not going to be mining for much longer. His third is just about mined out. I'm going to start trying to mine from this bottom right base again, but he lost a ton of SCVs, so Fantasy is definitely hurting for money at this point. Skyhigh not exactly swimming in cash. You can see there are about 300 minerals, but he does have that mining base at the bottom right natural, which is going to swing back into his favor. So the economies of the game swinging back towards back into Skyhigh's favor as this game develops, and this is just a crazy, crazy game, swinging back and forth economically, militarily, positionally, swing, swing, swing. And Fantasy coming in up here to the top left is going to try and clear out Skyhigh, and is going to be able to do so with an overwhelming pure tank force, not mixing in Goliaths, not mixing in Vultures, and just able to go, basically at this point he's going pure tank Wraith. Whereas on the other side we see tank Goliath, as well as some Wraiths of his own mixed in a little bit here and there. And Fantasy bringing his Wraiths up to the top left is going to be able to save that command center once again. So Fantasy, Fantasy does have a couple of advantages that he's been able to do in this game, and that's that he's been able to keep his command centers alive for the most part. Even though he's lost the bases, he's been able to keep his command centers alive, hasn't had to rebuild them, and as soon as the opportunity comes that he can retake those bases, he will have the command centers ready in order to take them. But Sky has done a really, really good job of making sure that Fantasy is not able to sneak too many bases here in all of the corners of the map, and not allowing him to really get a huge macro advantage, which is where Fantasy will really beat you. Fantasy will beat you hardcore in TVT just through pure macro and just excellent positioning. That is the Fantasy MO for TVT. On the other side for Skyhigh, it looks like the thirds are just about mined out. Same for Fantasy, and that top left survives. Like I said, that top left surviving is a huge deal. So Fantasy will be able to go ahead and start mining from there again. And at the same time, it doesn't look like Skyhigh has taken the third at the top left. He's bringing in a dropship with what, I don't know. I think Skyhigh should really consider taking that base at the third of the top left. I think you should try and clear out the forces of Fantasy and see if you can take that. And a dropship coming here to the top left, dropping off 4 Goliath, and that dropship is going to go down. But a scan comes in here, so the Wraiths are not going to be effective, and the Goliaths are going to try once more to clear out the SCVs in this location. I'm going to pick off a bunch of them, and then start picking off the command center, and if they're able to do that, that would be a huge victory for Skyhigh. Fantasy does look like he's bringing in some tanks, at least he was. I did see them a little bit earlier, but it's not going to be enough. This command center is going to go, well, if Fantasy just focuses, Skyhigh just needs to focus it, and it'll take down, shoot the command center, Skyhigh. Please, Skyhigh, shoot the command center. Oh my god, come on, Skyhigh, shoot the Oh, that is so disappointing. This is going to be so disappointing if Fantasy is able to save this command center by repairing it. That would be the most disappointing thing in the world. Fantasy, with his Wraiths, going to the 6 o'clock, well, I guess it's the 5 o'clock position, and is going to take down as many SCVs as he can there, but the Goliaths do win in the top left against the tanks, and just barely he might be able to take down the command center in the end anyways. Skyhigh playing dangerous games there, and no, he's not gonna take it. Skyhigh, no. Oh man, he's not gonna be able to finish off the command center. I think he really needed to take down the command center. He really needed to take down the command center, not because the mining is so scary, but because location-wise, now Fantasy is mining from 2 different ends of the map. That's 2 different locations that Skyhigh needs to put pressure on. And since this game has not developed to the point where we've had 200 armies, where we've had massive amounts of money, where we've had massive amounts of dropships and mobility, it's just one of those situations where it's actually advantageous. It's one of those weird TVTs where it's actually become almost advantageous to be spread out, because neither player has enough forces to really put an overwhelming number of troops in any location. We've seen that many times this game already, where both players in different times have been spread pretty thin and then been vulnerable to a coordinated push at one location. And so Fantasy mining from 2 locations is going to basically force Skyhigh to attack in one or both locations, and Fantasy is going to try and do a little counter attack, is what I think is how this game is going to develop. He's going to try and counter anything that that Skyhigh tries to do, and these raids still being very, very effective, still picking off SCVs at the bottom right, and still maintaining a very good nuisance presence. So Skyhigh down to 1 mining base, Fantasy at 2, although neither one has their gas going, but it does look like Fantasy has 1,400 gas stockpiled, as well as 1,000 minerals, so not really sure what he's spending his money on. Would consider that he would be spending that money pretty aggressively, since he is down about 45 psi. He really needs to keep his production up. I don't think Skyhigh realizes that he's up 45 psi. I think if he knew that, he might try and be a little bit more aggressive with his movements here. It does look like he might come in here for a drop and try and take down this batch of tanks that's on the high ground. Very, very vulnerable to a coordinated drop push. It's possible, but Skyhigh's got to be careful, because there are other tanks just above them that could end up turning the tide if he's not careful. And here comes Fantasy, going to come in here for some harassment, and with him with a couple of tanks into the low ground, into the main bowl, and Fantasy now, or Skyhigh, not having any of it, picking them off, but Fantasy going to keep it up, ferrying in some more tanks, and we'll see if this is going to be enough, if Fantasy is going to be able to take down this base. It doesn't look like Skyhigh is going to let him, though. Bringing in some more troops, that is going to be enough, and I think Fantasy is not going to press this any further, I don't think. Bringing in another dropship worth of units, though, so maybe I was wrong, and he will try and force this. I'm sure part of this is also to try and protect his 4th right now, that's just to the north of this. Both players really wanting to protect their mining at this stage. And actually, Skyhigh has left the natural wide open. He's put so many forces in the back there that now his natural is wide open, and he is going to lose the natural there. So a little bit of a tactical misstep finally from Skyhigh. I think this was his first major tactical misstep here in this game. Right now, coming in here, and he is going to lose this command center, and that is very, very unfortunate for him. Very, very unfortunate from him. Putting too many forces into the main. I think he just really thought that Fantasy was going to come in there, and Fantasy comes into the natural expansion, and where Skyhigh doesn't have enough forces, and gets a nice big victory, in my opinion. That could actually end up being a very, very critical blow that Fantasy just delivered to Skyhigh. We also see, what else have we got going on here? Well, that command center actually does survive, just float over there into the main, so at least he'll be able to keep that alive, and if he's able to retake the position, he'll be able to retake that base. But things are starting to look a little bit dicey now for Skyhigh. I really thought with that natural expansion he would be in a good position into the later stages of this game in order to really have the economic advantage and the side advantage. But now I'm a little bit wary. Here comes Skyhigh coming in here with the drop to the top left. This is exactly what he needs to do. Give a small drop. See how small this drop is? With those drop ships, you can just send a small number of forces there to do a ton of damage, and that is exactly what they're doing. And he's actually ferrying more troops here, so Skyhigh is really going to focus on this base, going to try and take it down. And a bunch of raids get caught and destroyed, so Fantasy just lost a lot of his raids, which have actually throughout this game been a huge factor in keeping his in keeping his positional advantage has been the power of those wraiths moving back and forth, picking off tanks, picking off vultures, picking off a dropship. I think even in 1 or 2 instances picked off dropships, and they have really helped him throughout this game. But no more. Most of his wraiths did just go down. I think 1 survived. Now we see Skyhigh pushing on the right side of the map, going to try and get to those mining SCVs, see if he can try and take down some of them. And Fantasy is going to have to back off. So Fantasy is no longer mining, folks. Fantasy is no longer mining. He has that 11 o'clock base, the natural expansion. That one is just about up. So both players, neither of them, this has got to be this has been a hyper aggressive TVT from 2 players who are known for their long macro TVTs. This has been a very micro, very aggressive TVT, and Skyhigh getting a little bit of a twitch there. This has a huge stockpile of gas right now, 2,000 gas, not a whole lot of minerals. Neither player has a whole lot of minerals, but Skyhigh at least does have the gas as the game develops, and Skyhigh looks like he's going to take that top left, one of those top left bases, and we'll start mining from there again. But neither player is really mining at this point. At this stage, neither player has a fully functional base, which is hilarious in the TVT. Neither player has a fully functional base. We have these half bases, these no gas bases, like half saturation, I think, for each player. I think they have a half saturated base right now for mining, and yeah, pretty amazing to see. This is not your everyday TVT, folks. Not at all. You don't have the overwhelming economies. You don't have the super huge 200 armies and the massive number of dropship plays. Instead, we've seen a really tactical game here. I think relatively small unit tactics and just trying to find weaknesses in your opponent's defenses. And once again, we see this again. So Skyhigh again with all those forces inside of the main. He's going to lose the natural, or I'm sorry, the third in this case. But basically, you know, it amounts to a very similar situation. And Skyhigh bringing in a dropship with Goliath to try and defend it. And it looks like he may actually end up being successful here. Although Fantasy can just probably turn right back around. That's exactly what he's going to do. He's just going to turn right back around. But and Skyhigh, as we're going through here, you can see the commentator showing you that he's got forces in about 3 or 4 different locations right now. None of them actually defending a base, though. The one on the right side is blowing up a base. The one in the middle is kind of putting some pressure on the 6 o'clock base. But this force at the top left not doing a whole lot at the moment. He is trying to bring it into usefulness now, by being a little bit aggressive towards that top base that Fantasy has. The one thing it is doing is it is kind of defending the low ground there of that base at the top left that he may decide to take at the third, kind of defending that location. But this force overall here in the top left, once it blew up that base, it needed to get out. Really, it needed to find another location. This is not like we said. This is not your normal TVT. You don't have enough forces that you can just leave a huge glob doing nothing. And so the Skyhigh with that force still up there in the top left, still doing nothing. Looks like he's realized that the error. He's realized the problem with those forces. So what is he doing? He's going to take his command center and float up there. The problem is now he's either going to have to drop ship some SCVs over. He's going to have to slowly build them up because he certainly can't do a transfer with all the tanks of Fantasy in position. We do finally at this point see Fantasy getting an advantage in the supply count. It's been a long time since Fantasy has been advantage supply count. He's been down 40, 45 at different points in this game, but now he's up 25 and finally starting to assert his will, as it were, a little bit. Skyhigh now in the 2 corners. He's in the bottom right, he's in the top left, and Fantasy kind of has the rest of the map. He's got both natural. Skyhigh's got both mains remaining, and this map is incredibly symmetrical. If you look at it, it's incredibly symmetrical. If you take out the red force, the Fantasy forces at the third of the top left, it's almost like a mirror flip situation. It looks very, very identical, which is really kind of cool, kind of weird, kind of cool. I like it. Artistic for the artist in me. I like it. But anyways, here we're gonna have a little bit more of a fight from Skyhigh as he's pushing out a little bit. He just doesn't have any money. Skyhigh just has no money. Like, you can watch he's got 96, 104, 103, 111, 119. Like, the fact that I can actually watch and count as he's gathering minerals is really, really bad. That's a very, very bad thing. Like, you don't want to be able to count your minerals going up. That is what you do at the beginning of a game, not here at the end. Whereas on the other side for Fantasy, he's got SCVs enough at both locations that he is really starting to take the advantage money-wise, and he's up about 30 side right now. We said that it was about 20 before, and that's going to keep going right now. Skyhigh needs to do something. I don't think Skyhigh realizes that this is going to be, I would say this is his third for the game. This is going to be his third tactical misstep, is that he hasn't done anything in the last 3 or 4 minutes. He hasn't done anything, and that is going to cost him this game. Fantasy is going to clear up this force in the bottom right. Skyhigh's going to have to GG. This is it, folks. Skyhigh is going to lose this game. Fantasy, with the overpowering economy at this point, just too much economy. Skyhigh just, you know, long-term end-of-the-game situation. Skyhigh just did not understand the position he was in, unfortunately, or just wasn't able to do anything about it. Probably a combination of the two did not feel like his forces in either location, bottom right or top left, were going to be able to push those naturals. And that combined with the fact that he had less SCVs mining from those bases leads Fantasy to victory, basically. I think the biggest step in this game for Fantasy, the real swinging factor, we saw this game go back and forth, held in the balance, and no matter even when Skyhigh was up about 30 side, it was still very, very close. I think now I don't think there's any way that Skyhigh comes back, but I think at the bottom right, when Skyhigh put all those forces into his main, thinking that Fantasy was going to do a huge drop when Wraith pushed there, Fantasy just takes the natural. I think that was really the turning point of the game. That was really the biggest point of the game, because that gave Fantasy 2 naturals with high ground to defend, and Skyhigh had a main that wasn't very saturated, and so that really just gave him the win. And Skyhigh here is going to be forced to type out any second now. You can feel it. There's just, you know, he's just got nothing left. The Wraiths are going to pick off all these siege tanks up here at the top left, and Skyhigh might hang out. I mean, he still has this big blob of tanks in the middle of the map, but it's just not going to matter. He can try. He's going to do one last push, it looks like, but it's just not going to matter. And 52 side, he's got half of Fantasy at this point. Wraith's picking off the rest of this top left. And I've got the hiccups as we reach the conclusion of this game. Skyhigh doing a really short leapfrogging with his tanks at this point. And GG from Skyhigh, not even going to bother doing a last futile push out. Fantasy getting a victory. I think that was a really, really awesome game. That was a very different TVT than what we usually see. Very tactical, micro-oriented, small unit tactics rather than the usual huge fleets that we see in TVT. I really liked that game. That was really fun to watch. I hope you guys enjoy. I actually thought that was a great TVT. That was one of the more entertaining TVTs I've seen in a while. Especially considering we didn't see battle cruisers or, you know, 30 dropships or 500 Wraiths or anything like that. I still thought it was really, really entertaining. I hope you guys did too. But that's going to be it. We're going to go on to set 3. SKT going to try and close it out. I'll see you guys all there.